This is gutter oil being collected. If you've visited or lived in China, you have eaten gutter oil. What you see here is a restaurant worker straining out used chili oil from a trash can. This is being collected to be reused for the next customer who orders spicy hot pot. This man is confronted and asked, do you not have family you care about? I understand it's difficult to make money these days, but how would you feel if your elderly parents, your children and relatives ate this poison?
To
which he replied, you're right, I'll be on my way. Gutter oil, or digoyo, is a huge issue in China. And it's a problem that hasn't gotten better, it's actually gotten worse. Here's the thing about gutter oil, okay? For those of you who are not familiar with gutter oil, this is something that is very, very common in China. And there are a couple of types. We're going to be talking about gutter oil and spittle oil, or I suppose you could say saliva oil are the two major ones. How is it that we ever got to this point? Just trying to get some work done.
We've been trying to reach you concerning your car's extended warranty.
What? No! Let's get back to work. What? Seriously? Okay, this is ridiculous. I have to do something about this. Did you know that you actually have the legal right to get data brokers to remove your name from their lists that they sell to people? The problem is, there are so many data brokers and you need to send lawyers' letters and legal papers and it's a hassle. And you know what? I don't know how to do it. I'm pretty sure you don't know how to do it. But there is a way, and that is Incogni. They do it for you. It's time to take your privacy back. Are you sick and tired of spam calls? Are you sick and tired of getting all these targeted ads all the time, all the junk mail in your mailbox? Incogni is the answer. When you sign up for Incogni, you give them permission to legally get your name and personal details removed from data brokers' lists. And they have a lot of information about you. A lot of these data brokers actually have not only your address, your IP address, but your phone number, your social security number in some cases. A lot of your very personal information that you just don't want to be out there on, for instance, people searching websites where people can look you up by putting in your name and find all your details. If you're a person who cares about privacy, I think Incogni is the service for you. Check it out by visiting incogni.com/Winston. Use the code SERPENTZA to get 60% off. It's a fantastic deal. Protect your privacy today. Go to incogni.com/Winston and use the code SERPENTZA to take your personal data off the market. And now back to the show. So gutter oil is when people take oil and sludge and grease and so on from the sewers, okay? Or from grease traps outside of restaurants. Basically lift a manhole cover, dig in there, get the grease and the oil that's trapped in there, put it in buckets, take it off and sell it to a processing plant, which then goes and processes this oil into something that looks brand new. And it can be done. You know, they boil it and they strain it and they do all this stuff. And at the end of the day, they put it in a cooking oil bottle and it looks brand new as if you've bought it outside of the shop. And it's actually very difficult to tell, you know, by looking at it, if it is legit or not. And then these are actually sold to restaurants and to people to use in their homes at a much discounted price. There's a lot of money to be made. And the reason for this is, of course, is that it's free, okay? All it takes is a little bit of your time to go and dig this stuff out of the sewer and out of the manhole covers and from the gutters and so on, and then you can go and sell it, right? And then you're not even getting a lot of money. The collectors, by the way, aren't the ones making the digoyo. They just collect it and they take it to these little clandestine factories that spring up all over the place. Then they just process it and then sell it for a big profit, because think about it, you can sell it for half the cost of new oil and you're still making a lot of money. So that's the gutter oil or digoyo. which ends up in your food a lot of the time. And this is a big problem in China because it makes its way into restaurants. Doesn't matter if they're fancy restaurants or low-end restaurants, it doesn't matter, because all you need is a unscrupulous restaurant owner who wants to save a little bit of money. And there you've got cancerous, poisonous, very not good for human consumption oil being used to cook your food. And nobody will know because the effects are only long-term. So you can eat at the same restaurant for 10 years. You finally get cancer. You don't realize it came from the food from that restaurant because they're using gutter oil. And the second type of oil we're going to talk about is 口水油, or saliva oil, or spittle oil, or spit oil, I guess you could call it. And what this is it's very common in specifically restaurants that have some kind of a chili or a spicy hot pot dish. You know, hot pot in China is very, very popular. And that's when you get a broth or a soup and you boil it on the table and you take bits of meat and vegetables and you dip it in the boiling hot soup and it cooks the meat and then you eat it, right? So when you're finished, you don't drink the soup. What's left there, the broth, which has got chili oil, if you got the spicy one, which is very popular in places like Sichuan, for instance. You've got that chili oil sitting there on the table. The waitress takes that away to the kitchen. And then what they do very often is they just right then and there take that same chili oil or that same broth and put it into a new one to go take out to someone else's table. So they're reusing this, the same oil and broth that somebody's been, sticking their spit in mouth and food and whatnot in. It's really disgusting because there you go, sit down in the restaurant, this brand new pot comes onto your table, but it's actually secondhand. But of course, the reuse of chili oil is very common, and if you can't just quickly reuse it, some restaurants, in fact, quite a number of restaurants, if all this footage is to be believed, you'd simply go out into the trash and collect this chili oil from either their own restaurant, where they've thrown stuff away, or from competing restaurants, because, hey, you don't have to pay for chili oil if you can just dig it out of the trash. And it's very easy because, you've got these trash cans, as you can see here, and they're just full of slop, all the leftovers that's been thrown in there from the restaurants. And because of the properties of oil floats to the top, so it's very easy to just skim it off. And that's what you see these ladies doing here, is they very easily just skim the chili oil from the top, put it in a bucket, and they could take it back into the restaurant. In fact, you can see it over here, the restaurant workers, even wearing their uniforms, taking the used spit oil back into the restaurant to then be served to new customers that walk through the door. And it is disgusting. But we all know about this. I'm sure everybody is aware of the gutter oil problem in China and the spit oil problem in China. But the question is, why on earth does it still persist to this day? Because this has been a problem for as long as I can remember. Even in the early days when I was in China, I was hearing about spittle oil and digoyo, gutter oil. And my Chinese friends would warn me about it, and people would talk about it, and it would be in the news. And there'd be a scandal where you find out that a whole chain of very good restaurants had been using gutter oil, and people would be arrested and so on. And in fact, the Chinese government even started to put very harsh penalties in place for gutter oil. At first, lengthy prison terms if you're caught selling it, and then later even the death penalty, which actually some people have been given the death penalty for selling and producing gutter oil. But the problem is, if you look up the cases, there are actually very few people that have actually been sentenced to death. And so this is the real reason why it still persists and has gotten worse. And that is, first of all, it's easy to get away with, all right? Very few people have been punished for this, even though it is a nationwide problem. When the crackdowns happen, they do happen, but then they're over fairly quickly and things resume as usual. But the biggest reason why gutter oil is still a big problem in China is that the economy is currently suffering big time. Now, what's the biggest way to make money in a poor economy? Well, it's to take shortcuts. Because everybody that makes money through food, which, the food industry is one of the biggest in China. Think about it. You've got all these mouths to feed. You've got all these restaurants everywhere. You've got all these little mom and pop side of the roads food stalls and so on. Everywhere you go in China, there's street food and restaurants, and it's cheap to eat out in China. It's one of the things I loved about China the most is the fact that it actually worked out to be cheaper to go to a restaurant every single day for lunch and dinner than to cook at home for myself. That's just the nature of how China is. Eating out is cheap. Of course, you can go to very expensive places if you like, but if you just go to your average everyday restaurant, you actually end up saving money. So these guys that have these food stalls outside, if they're going to go buy a thing of cooking oil to cook their stuff, they don't have a lot of profit margin. Remember, when they're selling their fried dish, whatever they're making, whether it's fried noodles or rice or whatever the case, their profit margins are so small that even 1 cent savings makes a difference. So the cooking oil is the core ingredient to everything that's cooked in China. Pretty much everything is fried in oil in China. The majority of foods, of course, you do get steamed foods and a couple of other ways of cooking, but the majority of the food that you eat, the rice and the noodles and the vegetables, it's all stir-fried. It's all cooked in oil in a wok or whatever. So it's a core ingredient in cooking in China. So you have to use it, right? And if you're running a small little side-of-the-road food stall, the only way for you to actually make profit is to cut down your costs. And since that's your biggest consistent cost is the oil, go ahead and pay half or a quarter of what you would for real oil for the gutter oil. That's why it's so prolific. And then the restaurants. Restaurants have to turn a profit. They're not making a huge profit off of their meals. They've got waiters to pay and waitresses to pay and so on. And so if they can cut down costs on their cooking oil, which is an ingredient that's used every day, all day in the restaurant, of course they're going to do it. Now, I'm not here to try and justify it. It's an abhorrent practice. It's terrible. But I'm explaining to you why it still persists to this day in China, and specifically now, because the economy in China is suffering a lot more than you would ever realize. I've been talking to a lot of my friends in China. Just remember, I lived in China for 14 years. I've got a lot of friends, ex-colleagues, people I've known for the longest time, old students and so on. And the younger people specifically are complaining about how the economy is really hurting at the moment. And it's not something you'll get through the news. It's not something that the Chinese government will ever admit. They just want you to believe that the GDP keeps going up and up and up. But it's actually far worse than you know. A lot of places were hit hard by COVID. A lot of businesses shut down permanently because of COVID. And a lot of the restaurants that managed to survive only managed to survive by cutting costs, like skimping on ingredients, buying lower quality stuff. And you see this across the board in China. Fake booze, fake vaccines, all sorts of horrible little shortcuts that lead to bad decisions that affect people's health. So that really is the reason why this gutter oil is not going to go away. And the gutter oil syndicates are more and more sophisticated than before. And if anyone tries to pretend as if it's being taken care of and that the government clamped down and it doesn't exist anymore, that's bullshit. Because not only is this footage that I'm showing you recent, but I filmed a lot of it myself. I filmed this stuff with my own eyes. Now, if me, just a single individual walking around in the streets of China and specifically living in one of the best, most prosperous, biggest, brightest cities of China, Shenzhen, if I saw it on a regular basis, so much so that I've got footage that I filmed myself and something that I would be commonly just scoffing at and saying, oh, there we go, gutter oil again. If I, as a single individual, could see that, just imagine how widespread it is across the country. And I mean, these clips that you see here are a bit of an indication as to how widespread it is. So much like the gutter oil is in the sewer, in the toilet, so is the Chinese economy. And this is a great indicator. I hope you learned something, everybody, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, don't forget to check out my Friday show, where we talk about all the latest and greatest coming out of China, the latest news. We covered a massive tragedy this past week where, the poor construction, shortcuts in construction, again, it's not just food, but the shortcuts in construction led to the roof of a gymnasium collapsing and killing an entire girls' volleyball team. All young 16, 15-year-old girls were killed in an instant when the roof collapsed on them. It's absolutely terrible and terrifying. But if you want to see more about this stuff, please go and check out The China Show, which I do with my friend Lau86 every week. And I hope to see you there and in the next video. Until then, you know the drill. As always, unlike gutter oil or spittle oil, stay awesome.